Alan had always been a man with clear priorities, and starting a family was never one of them. His life was neatly ordered around his ambitions, his career, and the quiet satisfaction of his solitary existence. The idea of marriage, let alone children, had always seemed distant, a chapter of life he could skip without consequence. However, when the opportunity arose to marry the daughter of a millionaire, his well-laid plans began to waver. The prospect of such a union was undeniably tempting. Marriage to a woman of wealth could catapult him into a higher echelon of society, offering him influence and power that would have otherwise been out of reach. But there was a factor that troubled him deeply: the appearance of the young woman he was considering marrying. Her looks were not what he had imagined for a wife, especially one whose beauty might be seen as a reflection of his own success. Alan knew he had to weigh this decision carefully. On the one hand, the marriage would provide him with all the material advantages he had ever dreamed of. On the other, he worried about the social implications of being married to someone who did not fit his ideal of attractiveness. It was a shallow concern, perhaps, but one that gnawed at him nonetheless. After much deliberation, he chose to go ahead with the marriage, rationalizing that the benefits far outweighed his reservations. Yet, as the day of the wedding approached, he remained uneasy, sensing that this decision would bring unforeseen consequences. As the months passed and his new wife became pregnant, the atmosphere in their household shifted. What was once a place of quiet ambition became charged with excitement and a hint of anxiety. The impending birth of their first child brought with it a whirlwind of emotions. Alan found himself contemplating fatherhood in ways he had never expected. He envisioned his child, his heir, taking over his legacy, continuing the work he had begun, and perhaps even surpassing his achievements. The thought of a son, in particular, thrilled him. A son would mean a direct continuation of his lineage, someone who could carry on the family name and secure its place in society for generations to come. On the day of the birth, the house was filled with a tense anticipation. In the living room, Alan paced nervously, his mind racing with thoughts of the future. Meanwhile, in the bedroom, his wife was laboring to bring their child into the world. In those days, hospital births were rare, and the presence of a trusted midwife was crucial. The midwife had been with the family through the entire pregnancy, offering support and reassurance, and now she was by the mother's side, guiding her through the final, most difficult moments. The rest of the family gathered in the hallway, their faces a mix of worry and hope. Every sound from the bedroom seemed magnified, every cry or groan sending ripples of anxiety through the waiting crowd. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the baby's first cry filled the house, breaking the silence like a clap of thunder. The midwife appeared at the doorway, a broad smile on her face, and announced the news that would change everything: it's a girl. For a fleeting moment, Alan's heart sank. He had been so focused on the idea of having a son that the reality of a daughter had never fully crossed his mind. He tried to mask his disappointment, but it was there, unmistakable, in the tightening of his jaw and the slight downturn of his lips. A storm of conflicting emotions surged through him. A daughter was not what he had planned for, but even as he struggled with his feelings, a thought occurred to him, a thought that provided a brief, but cold, comfort. Perhaps in the future, he could arrange a suitable marriage for his daughter, one that would bring a young man of good lineage into the family. It was a plan that, in his mind, could preserve the legacy he was so determined to build. However, when he finally stepped into the bedroom to see his wife and newborn daughter, his thoughts were jolted by an unexpected sight. There, in his wife's arms, was the baby girl, tiny and fragile, yet already marked by a distinctive feature on her face. It was a birthmark, almost like a stroke of fate's hand, and it immediately drew his attention. A new wave of concern washed over him as he wondered, with a pang of fear, how this mark would affect his daughter's future. The mark seemed to symbolize everything that could go wrong, everything that was out of his control. In that moment, as Alan stared at the tiny face of his newborn child, something within him shifted. The superficial thoughts that had clouded his mind gave way to a deeper, more profound realization. This child, with her unique mark, was not just a pawn in his plans or a continuation of his legacy. She was his daughter, a living, breathing person who deserved his love and protection. The worries about her appearance, about the mark on her face, began to fade as he reached out to take her in his arms. In that instant, Alan felt a connection stronger than any ambition, a bond that went beyond his plans for the future. They named the baby Meline, a name that would soon become synonymous with strength and resilience. As Meline grew, the mark on her face remained a defining feature. It became a part of her identity, something that set her apart from others, but also something that made her unique. Over the years, Alan and his wife welcomed 3 more children into their family, each one bringing their own joys and challenges. Meline, being the eldest, naturally fell into the role of the older sibling, and with it came the inevitable teasing that often occurs among brothers and sisters. In many ways, Meline's childhood was filled with love and laughter, but the teasing she endured because of her mark carried a different weight. Her siblings, though they adored her, couldn't resist making jokes about the way she looked. They called her names, sometimes affectionately, sometimes with a hint of malice, pointing out the visible difference that made her stand out. Ugly was the word they often used, thrown at her in moments of playful provocation. It was a word that cut deeper than they realized, a word that, over time, began to erode Meline's confidence. Her parents, absorbed in their own lives and perhaps unaware of the impact, did not always intervene. The teasing, which started as innocent fun, slowly turned into a source of pain for Meline. She began to internalize the words, to see herself through the lens of her siblings' taunts. What had once been a mark of her uniqueness became, in her mind, a symbol of her flaws. The armor of self-assurance that had protected her in her early years started to crack, allowing doubt and insecurity to seep in. The love her family had for her was undeniable, but it wasn't enough to shield her from the growing sense of inadequacy that the teasing had sown within her. Madeline's self-esteem had been carefully molded within the protective yet restrictive cocoon of her traditional family. She grew up in an era where the roles of women were undergoing a slow and uncertain transformation. The winds of change had begun to stir in society, but the stronghold of tradition remained, casting a long shadow over the lives of many, especially in the minds of Madeline's parents. They held tightly to their beliefs, shaped by a time when a woman's primary role was seen as that of a wife and mother, and their expectations for Meline were no different. As Meline blossomed into a young woman, she began to sense a growing disparity between her aspirations and the life her parents envisioned for her. No longer the obedient child who accepted her place without question, Madeline's dreams began to stretch beyond the narrow confines of her upbringing. She yearned to explore the world, immerse herself in education, build a career, and forge her own path to independence. The familiar boundaries of her life now felt stifling, and she longed to break free from them. However, her parents, steeped in the traditions of their time, still clung to the belief that the ultimate fulfillment for their daughter lay in marriage and starting a family. They could not fathom the idea of her seeking independence or a life outside the domestic sphere. Madeline's growing ambitions placed her in a painful dilemma. On one hand, she was driven by a fierce desire to carve out a life for herself that was uniquely her own. On the other hand, she was deeply aware of the expectations her parents had for her, expectations that seemed inescapable. Adding to her internal struggle was the persistent shadow of stigma that had followed her throughout her life. A distinct mark on her face had set her apart from other girls, branding her as different. This mark, subtle yet ever-present, had become a symbol of her perceived imperfections, a constant reminder that she did not conform to society's standards of beauty. This sense of being different had deeply influenced Madeline's self-image. She had internalized the belief that she was somehow less deserving of the joys that other young women her age took for granted, particularly in matters of romance. The whispering voices in her mind told her that she could not be the protagonist in a love story, that she was unworthy of being desired or cherished in the way that other women were. As a result, while her peers indulged in dreams of wedding dresses, romantic proposals, and the promises of eternal love, Meline consciously chose to distance herself from such fantasies. She did not allow herself to dream of marriage or romantic happiness. Instead, she focused on more practical aspirations. One day, in secret, Meline attended a local event that promised to be a turning point in her life. A prestigious university had come to her town, hosting presentations aimed at attracting new students for the upcoming academic year. For Meline, this event was nothing short of a revelation. As she sat in the audience, listening intently to the university lecturers discuss the various courses, opportunities, and the prospect of personal growth, she felt as though a door had been opened to a world she had never dared to imagine. The idea of studying at such an institution filled her with excitement and a sense of purpose. She could see herself walking through the grand hallways of the university, engaging in lively discussions, and immersing herself in a life of learning and discovery. However, the path to this dream was fraught with obstacles. Moving to another city was not just a physical relocation, it represented a significant and unsettling shift in her life. While Meline knew that her family's wealth would ensure that money was not a problem, she was acutely aware that her parents would strongly disapprove of her living alone in a distant city. Their conservative values and protective instincts would clash with her desire for independence, creating a conflict that she dreaded confronting. As Meline perused the informational pamphlets at the event, absorbing every detail about the courses and opportunities available, she was approached by Alan, a familiar face from her past. Alan and Madeline's families had shared a close friendship for many years, and the two had grown up together, though their paths had diverged as they reached adulthood. "Hi, Meline," Alan greeted her warmly. "Are you deciding on the course you're going to take?" Meline looked up from the pamphlet she was reading, a wistful smile on her face. "Hi, Alan. I wish it were that simple. My parents would never allow me to live alone in another city. They still want me to stay close to home, where they can keep an eye on me. And what about you? Have you decided on your course yet?" Alan let out a heavy sigh, his expression mirroring her own frustration. "I know exactly which course I want to take, but my family is going through some tough financial times right now. It would be nearly impossible for them to cover the costs. So, even though I have a clear goal, it feels like it's just out of reach." In that moment, the two young people shared a silent understanding. Though their challenges were different, the sense of being trapped by circumstances beyond their control was the same. They both harbored dreams that seemed tantalizingly close, yet frustratingly distant due to factors they could not easily overcome. As Meline returned home that evening, the excitement of the university event still fresh in her mind, she resolved to take the next step in pursuing her dream. She knew it would not be easy to convince her parents to let her go to university, especially in another city, but she felt a newfound determination. She would have to confront them, to explain her passion for learning, her deep-seated need for independence, and the dreams that had taken root in her heart. This would be a turning point in her life, one that would determine whether she could break free from the traditions that bound her and step into a future that she could call her own. A storm of emotions raged within Meline, barely contained by her outward composure. No matter how carefully she chose her words or how eloquently she argued, the result remained the same: her parents were unmoved. Their verdict was absolute: she could only leave home if she were married. The discouragement was almost overwhelming, but even as she felt it seep into her, a new resolve began to form. Her mind, desperate for a solution, sifted through possibilities, and then, like a light piercing the darkness, a strategy began to take shape. Her memory latched onto Alan's face, bringing it into sharp focus. The more she thought about him, the more an idea started to sprout in her mind, an idea that might solve not only her own dilemma but also Alan's. She needed a way out, and perhaps this could be it. With her plan in mind, she decided to approach her parents once more, this time with a carefully crafted proposal. She stood before them, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "Dad, Mom," she began, pausing to make sure she had their full attention, "there's something important I need to share with you. I have a boyfriend, and he's expressed a desire to marry me as soon as he finishes his studies. However, he's currently facing financial difficulties, particularly with paying for university. This is where my proposal comes in. I know how much you value the idea of me getting married, so I'm willing to consider that option. We would get married, and in return, you could help finance our education." Her words hung in the air, and she watched as her parents' expressions shifted from resignation to something closer to surprise, even excitement. For so long, they had resigned themselves to the painful idea that their daughter might never marry. The mark she bore, a stigma they could never quite shake off, had convinced them that marriage was out of reach for her. But now, here was the news that a young man, especially one from a reputable family, was interested in their daughter. It was an unexpected turn of events, a possibility they had never dared hope for. Meline could see the glimmer of excitement in their eyes as they began to envision a future they had long since given up on. Their enthusiasm grew rapidly, and soon, they were fully on board with Meline's proposal. The prospect of securing their daughter's future alongside a young man of good family was too enticing to pass up. With surprising swiftness, they agreed to finance the couple's education, aligning themselves with the plan that Meline had so carefully presented. It seemed too good to be true, a solution to their worries, a path forward that they had never expected. As for Meline, she felt an overwhelming sense of relief and joy. The plan, which had started as a desperate attempt to escape her predicament, was unfolding better than she could have imagined. The thought of studying in another city, side by side with her future husband, filled her with hope. It was as if a heavy weight had been lifted off her shoulders, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to feel truly happy. Yet, beneath that happiness lay a gnawing awareness that there was still one crucial step left: Alan. Her parents' approval was only the beginning. Now, Meline needed to convince Alan to embrace this plan. She knew that what she was about to propose would sound strange, maybe even absurd to him. But she also believed in the logic of it, and she hoped that Alan would understand, that he would see this plan not as an imposition, but as an opportunity. The next day, she approached Alan with all the courage she could muster. Her heart raced as she explained the details of the plan to him. She laid out how their marriage could serve as a practical solution to both of their problems. She spoke with conviction, trying to convey the seriousness of her intentions while also acknowledging how unconventional this idea might seem. But as she spoke, she noticed the expression on Alan's face. It was a mixture of surprise and disbelief. He listened intently, but she could see the uncertainty in his eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, almost hesitant. "Madeline, I appreciate that you've thought this through, but let's be realistic. We're just friends, and honestly, we're not even that close. Besides, my main focus right now is my studies, not starting a family." Madeline nodded, her mind racing to find the right words to counter his objections. "I completely understand, Alan. Just like you, I have no desire to start a family at this point in my life. But consider this as a means to an end. This was the only way I could think of to convince my parents to let me study, and at the same time, it could solve the financial problem you're facing. We wouldn't have to make this into anything more than a temporary arrangement. Once we achieve our goals, we can go our separate ways." Alan stared at her, his mind clearly whirling as he tried to grasp the full implications of what she was proposing. "Are you suggesting that we pretend to be married just to secure our education and then part ways afterward?" he asked, his voice filled with both curiosity and doubt. Alan and Meline's decision to enter into a fake marriage was born out of practicality rather than passion. At first, the idea seemed utterly absurd, a far-fetched plan concocted in the face of personal challenges and societal expectations. However, beneath the surface, both young individuals recognized the opportunity it presented, a way to achieve their individual dreams without compromising their integrity. This unconventional agreement between Alan and Meline was sealed with a mutual understanding. Despite the unusual nature of their arrangement, they accepted the solution with a sense of resolve. The fake marriage was officially scheduled, and preparations began for a celebration that would mark the start of this peculiar journey. Meline and Alan, now bride and groom in the eyes of society, desired a simple and discreet ceremony. They wanted something that would reflect the pragmatic nature of their agreement, a quiet acknowledgement of the partnership they had formed. However, Meline's parents had a very different vision for their daughter's wedding. They were thrilled at the prospect of their daughter, whom they considered plain and unattractive, marrying a young man from a reputable family. In their excitement, they planned a grand and elaborate celebration, one that was far removed from the couple's wishes. On the day of the wedding, Meline and Alan found themselves dressed in formal attire, standing before an audience of curious onlookers. The ceremony was a spectacle, filled with pomp and circumstance, yet to the bride and groom, it felt like a theatrical performance. As they exchanged vows and acted out their roles as a loving couple, they couldn't shake the awkwardness of the situation. Their hugs were stiff, their kisses hesitant and uncoordinated. Every gesture felt like an unfamiliar script they were struggling to memorize, as they tried to navigate the complex emotions of pretending to be in love. Despite the challenges of this performance, they made it through the ceremony. As the day drew to a close, the couple prepared to leave for a new city, where they would begin the next chapter of their lives together, a chapter that would involve living under the same roof as husband and wife. But before they could depart, Meline's parents called them over for a final farewell. The couple braced themselves for the typical warm and encouraging words parents usually offer on such occasions. Instead, they were met with a strange, blunt sincerity that took them by surprise. "Alan," Meline's father began, his tone oddly detached, "I want to thank you for marrying our daughter. I know she's not exactly a beauty, especially with that mark on her face, but I assure you, she'll do her best to make you happy." The cruelty of his words struck both Meline and Alan like a blow. The bluntness of the statement left them momentarily speechless, a stark reminder of the societal judgments they were up against. However, Alan quickly regained his composure and, without hesitation, stood up to defend his new wife. "With all due respect, sir," Alan replied, his voice steady but firm, "your daughter is an incredibly beautiful woman, far beyond what you can see on the surface. If someone can't look past a mark on her face, then that person is blind to the real virtues she possesses." The room fell silent as Alan's words hung in the air. Meline looked at Alan, her eyes reflecting a mixture of gratitude and admiration. In that moment, a bond of solidarity and determination formed between them, stronger than any they had previously shared. Together, they turned away from Meline's parents and headed toward the life that awaited them. The next phase of their journey began in the bustling city where they would both attend university. It was a new environment, filled with challenges and opportunities, but also with the freedom to redefine themselves. Despite receiving financial help from Meline's parents, both Alan and Meline were determined to maintain their independence. They sought out part-time jobs, plunging into a hectic routine that involved juggling their studies with work. It was a demanding lifestyle, but one that both were committed to in order to preserve their sense of autonomy. From the outset, Meline had made it clear to Alan that he was not bound by any romantic obligations in their relationship. She reminded him that the marriage was nothing more than a facade, a strategy to achieve their goals. But as time went on, Alan found himself gravitating towards Meline more and more. Her company became something he valued deeply, and the initial boundaries they had set began to blur. What started as a simple, practical friendship, born out of their unique circumstances, gradually evolved into something much deeper. As they navigated the trials of university life together, facing academic pressures and personal challenges, their bond grew stronger. The camaraderie that had once united them as partners in a calculated plan began to blossom into genuine affection. Their friendship, originally based on necessity, transformed into a connection that was rich with shared experiences and mutual understanding. Over time, the emotions that had been buried beneath the surface started to emerge. The friendship that had once been a mere convenience evolved into a deep-seated affection. They found themselves sharing more than just a partnership of convenience. They were building a life together, piece by piece. By the time graduation arrived, both Alan and Meline had grown not just as individuals, but as a couple. Their experiences had equipped them with a solid foundation of knowledge and a strong sense of resilience. With diplomas in hand, they faced the future with confidence and decided to take the next step together by opening their own law firm. What had begun as a sham marriage, orchestrated under unusual circumstances, had blossomed into a relationship built on trust, mutual respect, and a deep, genuine love. Meline and Alan were no longer just study and work partners. They had become life partners, sharing dreams, facing challenges together, and celebrating triumphs as one. The story of Meline and Alan is a testament to the unpredictable nature of love. It reminds us that true love isn't confined to traditional conventions or predictable paths. It can emerge in the most unexpected circumstances, overcoming obstacles and thriving even in scenarios that seem improbable at first glance. Their journey shows that love is a powerful force, capable of transforming even the most unusual arrangements into something beautiful and enduring. If you enjoyed this story, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so leave a comment with a number from 1 to 5 to let us know how much you liked it. And don't forget to check out the video currently on your screen. See you soon.